What are we doing? G'day team, let's look at constraints. So for this example I'm doing now, we're going to have the box constrained to the hips, and we'll have each hand constrained to the box. So there'll be a couple things going on, but it should all work together pretty well. I've used this kind of setup on 2 projects and it seems to work fine. I'm sure there are different equally good, better ways, but this is how I do mine. So we never want to parent anything directly to each other, because that's kind of a destructive way of setting up hierarchies, and it's not very editable. So if we parent the box to the hips like this with P, why is P not working? P. Well, in this example we can't do it because they're referenced, I guess. So that's another reason constraints are better than parenting. But even if this was our own scene and we had access to all the bits and pieces in the outliner, none of these were referenced. That little blue icon there indicates that it's referenced. Even if this was all in the original scene, parenting is just a less versatile way of doing what we want to do. So when we're constraining the driver and then the driven is always the order that we want to set up a parent. The other terminology is master and slave, but I think we don't like using those words anymore. In the outliner here, what I've got set up is just the geometry, which, yeah, you can move it around if you want to, but I was told early on to never animate on geometry. It's a dangerous way to do stuff, because if you ever want to sub out the geometry for a different shape or make any changes to it, it can just affect it in a bad way and be unpredictable. So the box is constrained to, not constrained, it's directly parented to this control. And I'm not using a constraint for that because I know I always want this geometry to be driven by this controller. It's a very simple relationship, so there's no point using a constraint for something that's not complicated. What I will do here though is I'm going to group this kind of system into its own group, and that this is just a transform node. That's all that group actually does. It's just another set of coordinates for Maya to interact with. And what this means is that if we constrain the group to the hips, then we can move around the controller without having conflicting keyframes and conflicting sources of input. So once we're in the animation context, we go to constrain and parent, of course. I don't think I've ever changed my settings. I don't think there's ever been a need to for me. And now here we have the actual constraint. It lives under the object that you selected always. So now we can see that if we move the hips around, of course the box follows, but we can also set keys on it, for example. And we can set keys on the box with its own controller. And we don't get that ugly green, blue kind of channels, which indicates 2 sources of input. If we were going to select the group, it's blue because it's being driven, right? it's taking those actual values from the hips, from the constraint. And if we set a key on it now, they're green, which is bad. It's bad, right? I was told that it's very bad, but I've been using green channels in my latest scene, and it's not a big issue. It's just kind of a warning, as far as I can tell. Anyway, it's better to be blue because it's simpler for Maya to deal with. So now, yeah, we can set keys on the box controller, and we can still move the hips around, of course. The next thing I do is getting the hands attached to the box. And because we're going to use the controller to move the box around, not the group is just a shell to pass the information from the hips onto the box. But because we're going to be manipulating the box directly with the controller is going to be the parent of the IK handle. So I'll parent that again, and we can move this still where we want to after we've set up the constraint, or we can't. I assumed wrong, which means we can delete that constraint. It's not that one. That one's got the blue reference icon indicating that that constraint came in with the rig. So it's one layer deeper. We can just delete that. So what we want to do is put it exactly where we want, or pretty darn close. And it doesn't have to really be exact at the moment, for a reason I'll touch on in a second. Let's pretend that I intended to make that mistake before as a demonstration. So now it's parented through a constraint. We move the box around. Of course, the hand follows. And if we choose the IK controller in our channel box, we see they're blue, which is not ideal because as soon as we start setting keys on it, move it around, it's going to get clunky. So we'd prefer not to key on that if we can, and that's why that's a reason that we have this extra controller on the inside, which is the gimbal controller. And it's one purpose of it is so that we can avoid gimbal lock, which is this nasty beast, right? If you're in this situation and you want to rotate it, according to the screen that way, you kind of can't right now because there's no axis for it. But if you choose the gimbal, it's got its own set of axes which are independent from the IK controller, so it's just a way around that. But in our case, it also is useful for making adjustments to the hand while its parent controller is busy being constrained through other means. And in the outliner, it is just directly under the IK controller. So there's the IK controller and the gimbal controller. It's literally one step away. Another way that we could have set this up is use this this attach shape. I don't really know what this controller is intended for or why it's here. I don't know the utility of it, but it is just another group which we could have parented to the box instead, and that would allow us to move the IK controller without getting green keys. And that's what I did in my first project. In my second project, I did it the way I'm doing now, and it worked fine as well. So I don't see much benefit either way. I don't like using stuff I don't understand, so I have not been using this. We'll do the same to the other hand, but we'll learn from last time and we'll position it before we constrain. One, driver, then driven, constrain parent, and then we're good to go. So the box is controlling both hands. Of course, it only works when the hands are in IK. And the body is controlling the box, which is controlling the hand, so just this will move the entire system. Really simple, really easy. We can still move the box, we can still move the body, and we can still move the hands. And this can all be keyed. Now the tricky part comes in when we need to switch this off again, right? So he needs to drop the box. Let's grab everything and key it. We'll key the... No. What option did I set for key all? Alt G? No. Shift G? No. Yes, there we go. I change my hotkeys so often I never remember what's what. So the character is all keyed. Let's key the box as well. Scale doesn't matter. Don't care about that. Let's move to 20. Key that again. We'll key you guys again. Alright, so one thing I just noticed is that each of the hands, I think the blend parent was on 0 for some reason, which I don't quite understand. But we need to make sure they're both on 1. Otherwise it will not follow the box. Down here, if you have multiple parents, you can choose which one it follows the most, or a blend of each. And then blend parent, I believe, is just whether it follows a parent or not in general. So this is kind of broken down further here. So now we move over to 20 and say we've got the box. Let's move forward. Right, we've got some stuff going on. And then we want them to drop the box. So this constraint needs to turn off. And I think we like to do this over one keyframe so that we don't have Maya interpolating the blend of the change of a parent. Because it's one thing to control the curve of a body part that you can see and manipulate very closely and adjust that curve to make it look nice. But a graph for a constraint is more vague and more ambiguous than we care to try to wrangle. So it's easier to adjust it over one frame and just match up the position if and when you need to. More so when you need to, because things are going to go wrong. So over that one frame, we can turn off all the constraints. You can do them at different times if we need to, but I'm just going to turn it off for all the constraints at the same time. So first we need to find them all again. Here's the constraint for the box being parented to the body. We'll need to set that key. And we'll need to set that key. And that can be 0. So now on this frame, the body is not going to affect the box at all anymore. And then we need to do the same to the hands. Again, over one frame, key everything, chuck that on 0. And chuck this guy on 0 also. And now the box is free. So say 10 frames later, chuck in another key and I can fall to the ground. Maybe a bit forward. And our hands, which really ought to be in forward, FK right now, I'm not here to play around with FK and IK right now. This is fine how it is. We can see that none of the body or the hands are controlling the box anymore, which is what we want. So you can turn this on and off as many times as you need to, as far as I know. This is what our graph looks like, and this is across one frame. So on a different kind of scale, if you're looking at your whole time frame, it might look like this. It might just be a line kind of looking graph. One frame on, one frame off. Right, that's what I was looking for. So the keyframe for the parenting of the IK controllers is not on the constraint itself. It's on the actual controller, and it's down here, the blend parent channel. Good. Now I want to have the box pivot around this edge as if it's staying in contact with the floor, while one hand picks it up from the side. So because this box does not have a different pivot point, we could move the pivot point over to the corner. The shortcut is D, but I don't have that shortcut available to me right now. But you could hit D and move that pivot across to the corner, and that's fine to do if it's the only movement you're going to make with the object. But instead, what I would like to do is add a locator, which is such a useful feature that I've added it to my shelf here for quick reference. And we can chuck that where we think we will want it to rotate from. There are shortcuts like holding V to ensure it rotates. It snaps to a vertex, or C for a curve, or X for the grid. But look, eyeballing it is usually fine. In this case, I will directly parent this system to the locator. Why are we parenting in this case and not constraining? Because I don't see myself ever needing to turn off this relationship. Having the box parented to the locator does not take anything away, because I can always pick it up and move it separately if I need to. Where it's an interaction between two objects that need to be separate at some point, constraints are very, very helpful. But for this relatively closed system, parenting works just fine for me. So this locator is going to be the pivot point for the box moving up. And that's, I think, all the setup we really need. So now let's move you down by the box. This is the most fun part, is posing. Cool. So let's say he grabs it from the top. That'll do the trick. Well, you can just go away for now. By the way, if you hold E and left click, you get all your options for the different kind of object spaces. So Gimbal will show you the truest representation of where the axes are currently aligned. Object will be kind of the intended orientation, but you'll never see gimbal lock in this object context, because whenever you rotate something, it will rotate both other axes around it. But when you're in gimbal, this shows you how Maya's actually interpreting each of the elements of the axes. But yeah, you just hold down E, left click to drag to the different options. And it's the same with W. If you hold down W, you can change to object space, which is handy because often the object space will align with the orientation of the object. And sometimes you want it in world as well. Often the object will align with world space orientation anyway, so it doesn't matter which one you're in. But I find myself jumping between these a lot. And occasionally if you go down axis and then parent, that can be handy as well. In the situation, for example, where the box is parented to the hips, and you can see the hips are rotated around. So then switching the box into parent space for translation will make it easier to slide up and down the body. In some situations, it's still messy and confusing, but it's fine. So we've got the hand where we want it to be, so we can go ahead and constrain it to the box again. We go the driver, we choose the driven, and now this driven is going to have, is it going to have another channel down here? No, it doesn't. I think if it was a different object constraining, you know what, I don't think we even needed to set up a new constraint. And let's double check that. Let's go to the outliner of the IK handle, and it's still just the one constraint with still the same channel, so I didn't need to set up a new constraint. It's still just a relationship between the object and the hand. And now all we need to do is turn it back on. So now that that is back on, the box is controlling the hand again, which is what we want. Just confirming that in the space between, when that constraint was, oh dear, in the time where the blend parent is off, the box is definitely not controlling it, but then when we turn it back on again, it is controlling it. It's on and controlling it, off and back on again. Good, good, good. This is half for me than it is for you, you know. Now that the hand is constrained correctly, if we rotate this using the locator, it'll follow along quite well. No, thank you. And as we saw before, let's move that PV over somewhere more sensible. As we saw before with the first example, we can still move the hand around to get a more adequate position, and that is not going to affect the relationship at all. Move the hips around. Let's put this jump ahead. Let's key this. Move ahead, key it again. Rotate you up. And of course, as soon as we're done with that, let's key that. Let's key you as well. Good. Yeah, movement makes no sense, but that's not the point. But as soon as we're done with that, we can jump one frame forward again and get those constraints off. Say he wants to drop it. So blend parent back to 0, 1, 0, 1, 1, 0. Let's key the rest of it too, heck. Let's key the gimbal control as well, just for its position and rotation. I'm just going to chuck that back to 0 for everything. And this is kind of what I mean about what I said earlier. This is kind of what I meant about matching stuff up when you need to. Because I'd prefer the gimbal controller to be centered again in the IK controller as it was back here when we first set it up. Over this time we've changed the position and rotation of the gimbal controller because we needed to make adjustments, but as soon as the hand is controlling itself again, I'd like that gimbal controller to be back where it belongs, and that's because if the gimbal controller was all the way out here and we're trying to key stuff on the IK, it's it's mucked up and that doesn't look fun. It's confusing. It's more confusing than it needs to be. When it's already been attached to an object, we have no choice. We have to use the gimbal. In this particular setup, we have to. But as soon as it's left, yeah, back where it belongs. And we'll jump ahead a bit and move the box back to 0, and we can see the hand is not followed. The hand can do whatever it wants. Yeah. Of course, this guy is falling over now. Can move him back somewhere. And again, I get freaked out by these the green channels. They're green here, but they don't seem so scary anymore because, I mean, it's doing what it's supposed to do. So I guess it's just informational, saying, hey, just keep in mind we got two sources of values, so just be aware of that. Yeah. Not to say that you can't still animate it successfully. The thing I don't like about it though is it makes it harder to visualize which frames have a key set. When it's simply animated directly with the red keyframes, it's very easy to see, it's in between keys and now it's keyed on this frame. Over here we don't get that, which is, I don't know, it's a weird choice, I think. But hey, we've got the timeline, we've got the graph editor, we've got the dope sheet. Who uses the dope sheet? I do, I use the dope sheet. Anyway, that'll probably do for now. I'm going to stop. Cool.